Welcome to the Vernuncio Novak Report and the American Political Zone. From New York, this is Frank Vernuncio.
And from Washington, this is Daria Novak.
And Daria, we have seen a lot of dissent in Congress from the Republican side, mostly, of course, about President Biden's defense budget. Uh, Two United States congressmen on the Armed Forces Committee, Rogers being the senior member, are talking about how this really detrimentally affects our defense. Apparently, the Army is getting a 12% cut in its procurement budget, and the Navy is going to be so limited in its budget that it's not going to be able to produce anything to expand the size of the fleet. This, of course, comes at the time that China is pell-mell moving ahead, expanding the size of its fleet, which now significantly outnumbers the United States Navy. And I believe, Daria, you're the expert in this, but I believe sometime this year, China will be putting into service its next aircraft carrier.
Yeah, China is not stopping on what they're doing, unlike what the United States is up to at the moment. On July 1 of this year, the Congressional Research Service released a 75-page report called Coast Guard Polar Security Cutter Information. I'm very interested in the Arctic because, again, Frank, this is a new region that's coming into play with both China, Russia, the United States. It's great power competition potential up there. So you would think that given the potential implications for a northern passage, for minerals under the sea, for fishing rights that are up in this area, that people would be paying attention to this in Congress and make sure that we have the heavy icebreakers and the medium icebreakers that we need. This is pretty sad. While there's 3 heavy icebreakers in the budget and many years down the road, 3 more are proposed, which the money could go away. You know how that works with Congress. We right now have 1 icebreaker, literally. It's at this point, the Polar Star is the only heavy icebreaker the United States has, and this is compared to dozens and dozens by other countries, including, I believe, China has, I want to say, I don't know, I think
I believe it's
11 up in
42.
there.
42.
42,
Right.
42 something like that up there, and 11 that are, very nuclear, whatever. Uh, August of last year, one of our icebreakers, the Healy, was up in Arctic, caught fire, so they couldn't go to the Arctic. They've been out of service. So I thought, well, let me take a look and see what else we have. Another icebreaker, 11 years ago, caught fire. Their engine is still broken. 11 years ago, Frank. And on top of that, that particular icebreaker, the Polar Sea, is over 30 years old. It's beyond its service life. So when we're looking at budget money and trying to figure out what do we really need to protect our nation, to protect international commerce, maritime commerce on the high seas, what are we going to do? It takes time to plan, design, build, deploy, icebreakers like any other ship. But 11 years and they can't either fix an engine or replace the ship. Now, take this situation and compare it to both Russia and to China. Russia is active in the Arctic, becoming more active. They're now heading up the Arctic Council and intending to influence countries like Denmark with Greenland. China, as you mentioned, many icebreakers. We're facing off with nations with nuclear icebreakers and nations that have stated their hostile intent toward the United States. How can Congress not fund the basic programs that we need? Frank, I just don't get it.
I had the opportunity to spend some time on an icebreaker called the North Wind with the Coast Guard. And I can tell you, a remarkable craft. The North Wind has been taken out of service. It's decommissioned. It was far too old. Shows you how long ago that I was on it. Has never been replaced to my knowledge. And again, Daria, the numbers you presented are startling. We're talking about 42 icebreakers that Russia has. We've got one that I believe that's active right now that actually can go into service. Then you look at the Pacific. China has over 60 more ships, battleships that we have. It is ridiculous at this point And I think it is an indication of how bad our media has become, that this very real, very urgent military crisis barely dents the front page. Now, I'm somewhat proud that on this program and at usagovpolicy.com, our website, we have spoken about this on numerous occasions. We've brought up the statistics. We've talked about what's going on in the Arctic, particularly what Russia is doing, how China is edging its way in. But Daria, I don't recall seeing much of any coverage of this any place in the major media.
We don't see coverage of it. And this is what gets me so irate about what's going on in Washington. We're short-term thinkers. We go from congressional budget cycle, to command campaign cycle, through the next one, through a presidential cycle. Nobody is thinking long terms. Just to give you an example of our audience, an example of what we're facing off with right now when it comes to China. China recently declared itself a near Arctic nation, although it's 900 miles away, but it recognized the potential of mineral rights there, of oil, all the things that are the resources that are available in the Arctic in this fragile environment. So what did they do? They knew they didn't need the icebreakers today, but they built them and then rented them out to others until they need them. That's long-term planning. We can tell that China is intent on staying in the Arctic. Now, it also is important to recognize that the Arctic, if it opens up fully year-round, represents a much shortened, I believe by 3 weeks, passage for commercial ships as well as subs and military ships from China and the Pacific into the northern Atlantic and into Europe. So we're talking about strategic issues here. Frank, I don't know why the politicians don't think America. Right now, they just think about themselves.
Yeah. And incidentally, Russia, which, as you mentioned, is now head of the Arctic Council, just had another major accident, which is becoming almost an annual occurrence for the Russians, which has polluted the Arctic waters with spilled oil. This seems to be happening on a regular basis with the Russians. And interestingly enough, no one in the American media, for the most part, has taken much cognizance of this. If an American tanker spills a couple of drops of oil, it's headline news for over a year. The Russians have this massive spill, and the American media remains oblivious to it.
The massive spill you're talking about is not, as you said, an isolated incident. On the Kamchatka Peninsula, in one river, there were several very large spills that have literally turned the river red. This, like you said, is an ongoing.
We're speaking by color, not by political.
There were already reds there, but yeah, definitely, whatever the chemicals that were toxic, were put into the waterway. The locals use that water to drink from it, and they weren't warned about this incident that it was coming downriver. We've seen many incidents coming out of North Korea, China, and Russia, where rivers that have crossed international boundaries have had problems with, as I'm going to call it, red pollution, but literally toxic chemicals. And downriver, the populations are expected to drink that water. We talk about environmental concerns. I don't see that coming out of either China or Russia today. What they're looking at strategically is how do they become more powerful, more stable, expand their influence into other regions of the world. We, on the other hand, are hand-holding kumbaya politicians that are soft. And if you've ever looked at somebody on Capitol Hill, I'm sorry, I know this sounds prejudiced, but if you gave me a lineup of people, I could pick out who is soft and worked on Capitol Hill. You can tell by the jowls. Frank, we've got to do something about it.
Our military is becoming a disgrace. You watch the hearings in Congress, and they say their major focus, according to General Miley at one point, and Lloyd Austin, the new Secretary of Defense, is making sure that there's enough money for transgender operations. One of the new appointees to the Department of Defense said that his top priority is environmentalism. Now, look, whether you want to talk about transgenderism or you're talking about the environment, that's okay if you want to do that. But the Department of Defense's priority should be protecting the United States. having a military strong enough to deter anyone thinking of acting in an aggressive manner towards us. That's not happening at all.
You know, we are in a situation in this country now where we've seen what cyber threats can do, ransomware issues. We've seen what viral infections spreading through our population can do. When President Trump said the Wuhan lab in China was responsible, we needed to get to the bottom of it, it was said, oh no, the Chinese couldn't do this. All the progressive liberals in Washington were saying is, oh no, this is naturally occurring. We shouldn't blame China. Now what's happening, they're backtracking and recognizing, many scientists recognizing already that the way the structure of the virus is constructed is artificial. That means it was built in a lab. We know that the Chinese have conducted seminars, meetings, conferences about offensive bioweapons development. We have to be realistic. We would love the world, and I know you and I would love a peaceful world that flourishes, a golden age, but the reality is we have enemies out there, and I believe right now we have to call China an enemy, not simply a competitor, who want to see us deconstruct. That's dangerous.
And I believe, Jerry, you brought to my attention some time ago a speech by a Chinese general who talked about the efficacy and the use of bioweapons. And I think clearly this is what they were doing. This is what they were going for. This is not, I think, may have been an accident in the way it was released, but it certainly was what was being built in Wuhan.
You know, we may, and I know this is going to sound crazy, have been lucky in some ways that this occurred when it did, because China is not powerful enough to defeat the United States, to defeat the West now. I think people are starting to wake up and recognize that an individual life in China is not as important as the survival of the state. So China is willing to do whatever it takes to achieve its goals. President Xi Jinping has many times made the statement that he intends to change the norms of the international rules-based system to reflect China's image of how the world should run. That's dangerous.
Terry, let's go to our first guest. Larry Klayman is author of It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. He's the founder and former chairman of the successful nonprofit foundation Judicial Watch, and he currently serves as chairman of Freedom Watch. Larry, welcome to the program.
Yes, good afternoon, my honor.
Great being with you. I got to tell you, 2 weeks ago, I was at a charity event and everyone at the table was either a New York attorney or a judge within New York State. All described themselves, I knew many of them personally, as liberal Democrats. Despite that, every one of them were aghast at the decision to attack Rudy Giuliani for his statements about what happened in the election. How do you see that whole incident?
It's something that's happening nationwide. I'm going through it myself in the District of Columbia. The New York Bar and the District of Columbia Bar are run by ultra radical leftists that have given money to Obama, to Clinton, and also Biden. They're trying to eliminate any dissent, much like the FBI fanning out, you know, as Biden and Harris's private Gestapo and arresting anybody that was in Washington virtually on January 6th to try to quell any dissent. They're trying to eliminate the means for conservatives, people of faith, and others to peacefully resolve differences in the courts. So Rudy Giuliani, without due process, they suspended his law license. And there are cases going on, disciplinary proceedings in Washington, D.C., if you can believe this, against Kellyanne Conway for remarks she made on MSNBC, against Senators Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley for defending President Trump in Congress. That's all they did. They didn't do much, but they're trying to disbar them. Former Attorney General William Barr, who was also worthless, did nothing, but they took offense at him because he took back the indictment of Michael Flynn, General Flynn. And it's a total effort to try to destroy conservative lawyers. So Giuliani obviously was, you know, at the top of the list, and the New York Bar, which is corrupt and run by leftists without any reason other than the fact that he defended Trump, temporarily suspended him without even giving him a hearing.
Whatever happened to the report that was supposed to come out while Mr. Barr was head of the Department of Justice?
Well, that's the point. Is that, I mean, here they're picking on Barr. All 4 prior presidents of the District of Columbia Bar signed the ethics complaint against him, and he was actually their friend. He didn't do anything to the Democrats. I mean, he's part of the Washington establishment swamp, but they didn't like the fact that he had pulled back the indictment of Michael Flynn, and they said that was unethical. It's not unethical. That's his right to do it. He was Attorney General.
You know, in New York State, the state attorney general, even before she won her election, was talking about how her main focus is going to be attacking Donald Trump and the Trump organization. It seems that that is a clear, obvious abuse of the office of Attorney General, is it not?
Yes. No, it is. And you know, that's not the reason for a prosecutor. We know they're very political. There was a book and a TV movie many years ago, Bonfire of the Vanities, with Tom Hanks, you know, which suggested that was the case, which it is. But, you know, we just had yesterday, I want people to go and watch it, our Third Continental Congress in Philadelphia. 2 days of it. You can go to freedomwatch, usa.org. Also get my book. You know, I gave my book to everybody that was there. Very prominent people like Alan Keyes, like Armstrong Williams. Many of my clients have been abused by government oppression and dishonesty and corruption. Is that we were discussing whether we need to form a new government because this government doesn't represent the American people. And the justice system is the worst of the worst. My book was dedicated and is dedicated to Thomas Jefferson, who said that federal judges and Supreme Court justices, unelected, unaccountable to the people, will turn into despots and tyrants, causing a revolution about every 20 years or so. He didn't want to see that, neither do I. At least a peaceful one is fine, but not a violent one. But part and parcel to the problem are these federal prosecutors and other prosecutors, state prosecutors, who throw their weight around. They think they're God. The courts gave them immunity. They have no right to immunity. And we discuss things such as removing their immunity, you know, making certain additions to our Constitution to take away that immunity so they're held accountable for their actions. And judges are held accountable and others are held accountable as well. That was just one of our suggestions. So I hope that people will go and watch this because we're serious. We're not just talking. We're not just doing seminars. We are doing things to try to change the country. And that's what we need to do right now.
Larry, I want to ask you a question about the defund the police movement. We're starting to see now crime rates go up, not only in New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, but in many, many places where they're attempting to defund the police. At the same time, we're starting to hear complaints from the progressive liberals saying, wait a minute, my neighborhood isn't safe for me to walk in New York. There's too many murders and too much crime and violence. Do you think this represents a little bit of a division in the liberals? Is it enough of a crack or an opening for conservatives or others to get their message out? Or do you think they'll just, like a piece of mercury, come back together again and heal?
Well, first of all, you're being very polite. I know we're going to call them liberals. They're not liberals. They're leftists. They're Marxists. They're socialists.
Right.
National socialists, you name it. When they are threatened, when their skin is threatened, all of a sudden they take an interest. But when the rest of us are threatened, they have no interest, particularly if it's a conservative person of faith or someone who believes in the vision of our founding fathers. So then they just as soon see us dead, frankly. So, I mean, it's funny because I go to California a lot and you can walk down the streets of Beverly Hills and see people still wearing masks, driving their cars with masks. They love themselves. The left loves themselves. They worship themselves. They don't worship God. They worship themselves. And I'm being a little facetious, but I don't think it'll make much of a difference, frankly. I mean, we are in a war. We're in a war between left and right. Question is, who's going to win? And we better make darn sure that we win and they lose. There's no longer room for accommodation. There's no room to talk. Not when everyone is being called a racist for no reason. Not when people are pouring across the border that are a threat to this country, not when 2 and 2 doesn't equal 4 anymore, not when, they want to change our culture and trash our founding fathers. There's no room for discussion. One side will win and one side will lose. And that's why we had this Third Continental Congress, because we were suggesting peaceful and legal means. And that's what I do in my book. Things like citizens' grand juries, where people have the right to indict, try, convict, and mete out sentences. And it's time that we started doing that. We did that in the Old West, in days of Wyatt Earp and otherwise, and we can do it again. And in fact, even in a leftist state like California, if you know of somebody committing a felony, you have the right to arrest them and turn them over to law enforcement to take them into custody. And I believe that the police in this country and the military have had it. They've been disparaged, they've been abused, they've been assaulted, they've been killed. And it was just a few weeks ago that 140 plus retired admirals and generals sent a letter to Biden warning him that either he shape up or ship out.
By the way,
And
just to break in
don't
for a
push-
second, with the text of that letter is at our website at usagovpolicy.com.
Yeah, no, I'm not advocating it. I don't want to see it. But if the left keeps pushing, I believe they'll remove him. I believe they will. Because this guy is a threat to the country. He's destroying everything we stand for. In 5 months, and he doesn't even know he did it because he's so brain dead that they have to shoot him up with steroids or something just to get him to come out and sign another executive order. And
Right, the basis
the
of-
vice president, she's worse than a joke. I mean, first of all, she's dumber than a rock. And anytime they ask her a tough question, she just laughs. This is the person that's going to be in control when Biden, doesn't wake up one day by his own volition. It's frightening.
The basis of Anglo-American jurisprudence is precedent. And if we look over the past couple of years, for example, in Wisconsin, where I believe a bunch of teachers invaded and took over the state capitol for, I think, well over a week, there weren't many prosecutions that followed, but we're still seeing the Department of Justice actively hunt anyone who may have been in Washington on January 6th. Doesn't seem to match the concept of precedent, does it?
No, it doesn't. It's the FBI, and I'm a proud alumnus of the Justice Department when it was semi-honest, not totally honest, I might add, which is why I founded Judicial Watch to be the People's Justice Department in 1994. But it was nothing like it is today. Today, you've got this FBI director who's just a lackey, a yes man for the left. He goes with whoever's in power. Doesn't matter whether it's right, left, or center. He wants to keep his job. He wants to rise. That's the way you do in the ranks of Washington swamp and establishment. And he has been executing commands coming out of the Justice Department with this failed judge, Merrick Garland, who's now AG, who's almost as brain dead as Biden. And he's turned the FBI into a Gestapo. And they're arresting virtually anybody that was in Washington, D.C., indicting them, convicting, seeking their conviction. Some have pled out, and throwing them in prison without bail. And the judges are going along with it because they're the same way. They're establishment hacks. So this is why we had our Third Continental Congress, because the American people need to rise up. Again, I say peacefully and legally. But if we don't do it peacefully and legally, if we don't act quickly, it's going to get bloody. And I'm not going to advocate that. And you won't. And no any other person that, respects people's rights to exist. But that could be where we're headed, as Jefferson predicted, if the American people don't rise up now. So I say, turn off Sean Hannity. You don't need to hear the same monologue, every day for the last 10 years. Get up off the couch and join Freedom Watch at freedomwatchusa.org, or join some other group, or become active and, peacefully and legally go into the streets and protest. Don't be afraid that the FBI is being used as a Gestapo. You have the right to be peaceful and legal in the streets. Even when we were in high school, Henry David Thoreau, Walden's Pond, civil disobedience. The American people need to put their foot down now, because we are already 90% into what is going to turn into a communist hellhole under these radical leftists that are taking control of the country and are using Biden and Harris as their stooges to rubber stamp anything they want.
Larry, I want to go back to something you said earlier about a point of, do we talk to each other? In this country right now, what we're seeing in the last couple of years, and it's intensified, is conservative families moving out of the coastal states into, if you want to call them, the flyover states. And we're seeing liberals concentrating in metropolitan areas in New England. And we really can see a differentiation. I'm concerned because if we don't talk to each other, what's going to happen when we see that these types of moves mean jobs, families changing direction? That's not something like I can vote a different direction in the next election. These
Now,
changes are really permanent.
I wish we could talk, but look, let's take the example of the founding fathers and the colonialists. You know, yesterday I did the Third Continental Congress. The Second Continental Congress gave rise to the Declaration of Independence. The first issued a statement, you know, implored the king to engage us in a dialogue to correct some of the tyrannical actions of that king. And that king was far less worse. He was Mother Teresa compared to Biden Harris. King wasn't a socialist. He wasn't a communist. He wasn't a radical of any other group. He simply wanted to overtax us and pay for the rest of his empire. And when we balked, then he tried to take away our guns, and then he took away our legal system when we declared, you know, when authority we broke out at Lexington and Concord. But, you know, you can't talk to these people. You know, years ago, Ann Coulter wrote a book. It was a cute title, but it was an understatement. How to Talk to a Liberal If You Must. If you must. Today, they don't want to talk to us. They just want to destroy us. So the question becomes, you need to defend yourself peacefully and legally. You need to take the initiative. As far as I'm concerned, they should be written totally out of our body politic. They're simply evil. They're evil people. And
There are
most people in these groups.
There are two reports which the American people are literally screaming for. One is the Durham report, and the other, of course, is the investigation into Hunter Biden. Both of these have apparently vanished off the public stage. What can Freedom Watch or any other group do to get these things back on track and back before the public?
Well, I predicted it, and my friends in the beginning said, Larry, no, I think there's going to be justice. We always knew that was just a placebo, so to speak. That was a ruse that Attorney General Bill Barr created to take the monkey off his back, because these people are part of the establishment. They got where they got because they didn't rock the boat. Barr wanted to go back into private practice. He wants to be part of the Washington society and scene. And there's an unwritten, maybe it's even written, agreement between Democrats and Republicans that we don't gore your ox and you don't gore ours. We'll just simply hold hearings and go on cable networks and raise more money for our reelection. The American people see they have no government. They have no government. It does not exist for them. It only exists for the ruling class. And that's what I'm saying, you know, and it may sound extreme, but it's time that the American people see the facts of life. So I hope that you'll go to, and I'd love to come back on again if you have a chance to watch it, to 2 days of about 40 people who have been harmed by the government, mostly my clients, or people who are people of faith, very well-respected people, religious people, like Dr. Alan Keyes, like Pat Boone, like others. They're not violent people. They're not advocating violence, but they're giving their testimony on how the government has been not for the people, but against the people, particularly the federal government. I had the Bundys there, you know, the Nevada ranchers, all three of them, Cliven, Ammon, and Ryan. And you need to understand that you may be able to go to play golf and play tennis today, but your kids and grandkids will have nothing. They'll be living under a leftist, socialist, if not communist, total control if things continue as they are right now under the reign of terror, I would say, of people like Biden and Harris and those that prop them up and just have them come out and sign whatever they want because they think that's going to win them elections and allow them to maintain power and to acquire more wealth. And as for Biden and his son and his brother James, we indicted them in our citizens' grand juries. We're going to try them. These guys took millions and millions of dollars from the communist Chinese, from Ukraine and Russia, bribed to the hilt. And this is our president. And, you know, Tony Bobulinski, who was at one time considering being a partner of Hunter Biden, you know, gave testimony that 10% was to go to Joe Biden. Yet the Republicans won't touch it. And it gets back to Barr because you know what? They do similar things, maybe not in that grand a scale. Mitch McConnell's laundered money for years through his wife from communist China, head of the Senate. So both parties are corrupted. The Democrats are pure evil. The Republicans are simply corrupt to the core. This is what you've got. And it's worse than on July 4th, 1776. But the
You know,
people
Larry,
have need to wake up.
You know, Larry, I want to ask you one quick question while we still have you. I live out in Loudoun County in Northern Virginia, and we're seeing parents in the schools now stand up and speak out against critical race theory, CRT as it's known. Are we starting to see parents wake up so that they will be protecting the next generation? Is this happening across the country?
Yeah. Well, I think what you're seeing, not that much as anything, excuse me, is going to happen at the school boards. I used to live near you. I lived in Great Falls. I lived in Washington.
Oh, my hometown.
But yeah, on Springdale Road. But yeah, I mean, it's good that they're speaking, and it's good that they're coming forward. And it's a good sign that the people can be united and to rally. And as Benjamin Franklin said, I'm here in Philadelphia right now. I'm sitting right in front of City Tavern, where they used to go to deliberate after the Second and First Continental Congresses, all of our founding fathers. And Franklin said, either we all hang together or separately we'll hang. And therefore, we do need to group together. Remember, when communism was driven out of Poland and Eastern Europe, final, millions and millions of people went into the streets. And I don't remember it being violent, but the Soviets got the message, and they knew that it would get violent if they didn't leave, and they left. And it was
Larry,
that's
it
what's
has
gonna be
been a
said.
disturbing and fascinating conversation. We'll have to speak again real soon.
Thank you. I hope it is disturbing because we need to rise up right now. Thank you, both of you. God bless you.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
You know, when we're looking at whether we're talking about Hunter Biden or whether we're talking about Hillary Clinton, the list of those on the hard left who have openly, blatantly violated the law or violated their oath of office or violated the trust of the American people and faced absolutely no penalty whatsoever for it is astounding. Then you take someone like a Rudy Giuliani, who acted as an attorney or simply expressed his opinion about an election, and they are losing their livelihood just for doing that. Clearly, this assault on, I think, the center and on the right is just growing. It's getting larger. It's more insidious. And the precedent it is setting is worrisome for the future.
You know, I honestly can say, despite the way that he said things, I really miss President Trump because I felt like he was in the people's corner.
Yeah, he
Whether
was.
you know, whether he did everything right or wrong, you know, every human is fallible, but we needed somebody who was strong and could stand up and say that we're not alone here. Now I see that former President Trump, and I'm saying former because that's the way we are at the moment, is now suing Facebook. You know, I I I just can't believe that we've come to a point in this country where free speech is no longer treasured, but where some young people, even Frank, are willing to say, I'll accept less free speech
Yeah.
so that people don't get into an argument. And what this reminds me of is 20 years ago, 15 years ago, when kids were playing softball and t-ball, where the teams started to say, don't hit, don't have three strikes and the kid's out because it would hurt their feelings. You know, we have to have everybody have a good chance, an equal outcome. This is something that's been going on in our country for a long time, and it's going to take a lot of time and energy to turn it around, Frank. It concerns me that people will think I'll come out and vote in one or two elections and we'll be done with it. We'll be back on course. We saw that that didn't work during Reagan's period, and it won't work today. This is really a lifelong mission of people today.
Yeah, it's because basically Republicans think of politics as something they do on election day. The Democrats' politics is cultural. It is all pervasive. And I don't think that it is really a battle of equals. Um, when you have, and I'm going to be very blunt about saying this, when you have the left accepting Chinese money, for example, to push a point of view that Beijing wants in Hollywood, on your TV entertainment shows, on your college campuses, which take money from Beijing. Um, and frankly, the right simply doesn't do anything to counter that. I think what you were talking about before, Derry, with Loudoun County parents is maybe the first sign that people are beginning to recognize what's going on in our academic setting in our schools, where two generations of Americans have already been stolen from us by the hard left. And it's getting worse and worse. When we look at things like critical race theory, when we look at the horrible and totally false theories of history, the 1619 Project, based totally an incorrect premise, that are being shoved down our kids' throats. I think you're seeing the people starting to wake up to how bad this has become. And I've said this on the show numerous times. If you had had an enemy power invade the United States and plot to take away the future of our country by indoctrinating our young into anti-American theories that are totally false, you could not have done better than our educational system has done right now.
Well, you know, here in Virginia, people are taking a stand. There's a group called Virginia for Educational Freedom, and they're basically saying it's negligence or it's outright danger to the children, what's happening to them, outright abuse because of the things like closing schools, canceling graduations, critical race theory, dehumanizing social distances, unethical pressure to participate in things. You know, the list goes on and on. But I find it interesting that parents have drawn the line in Loudoun County. For those who don't know it, this is a county about 45 minutes outside of Washington, D.C., but many commute into the city. People have taken it and made a stand at this point and just said, you know, Frank, we've had enough. And I can tell you, my neighbors feel the same way. They've said that their children, when they see what they were learning online, were horrified at what their children were learning. Parents that were kept, according to the teachers, out of the room when the kids were online because they were supposed to be separate from the curriculum. What parent would be willing to walk out of a room and not find out what their child is being taught? You know, Frank, I think people here in Northern Virginia have had enough, and it's going to be a big fight, but I don't think it's going to end here. I think we're going to see parents across the country now wake up. The pandemic was one of the highest percentages ever in a poll in this country taken, where parents and individuals knew what was happening. Less people knew about 9/11 than they did about the pandemic.
Hmm.
Hopefully, this awakening of what's happening in the world will continue.
You know, whenever anything is kept out of the public eye intentionally, whenever it's kept secret, somebody is hiding something. You know, the same reason why, going back to our other topic, why the Durham report was never released to the public, why the investigation into Hunter Biden was kiboshed, why it was put down away from public eyes. Something is being hidden in all of these cases. And I think if most American parents understood what was taught to their children over the past couple of decades and is being taught even worse now, I think there would be an uprising in this country against school boards from one end of the country to the other.
Let me just give you one example, Frank. My kids are now in college. When they were in elementary school, upper elementary, they were told by their teachers to find out, this is in a mathematics class, find out what kind of car their parents drove. They were then told to find out what the gas mileage was of each car. The kids were supposed to compare cars and say who got the better gas mileage. They took it further in math class and then were condemning the families that had cars that weren't uh, good on mileage. Now, this is in a mathematics class. It's one example from literally about 15 years ago. Like I said, this is not something that started today, and that's what concerns me. We've literally moved slowly down this road to where each little step is on a path of destruction, but it's not an individual item big enough to cause people to react. My first thing was I went into the teacher and just said, I won't even tell you what kind of car I drive. It's none of your business. And I don't want my kids condemned for that. In another case, I saw that with my same children, so I know this happened, a straw poll for a presidential election was taken. The teacher ended up with this fourth grade class as the tiebreaker, and of course, supported the Democrat. You know, we have seen this in different varieties in classrooms across America. And I can see why we have the homeschool movement in this country really expanding. People don't need to have their children indoctrinated. I think they know it. Now we have to do something about it.
Yeah, I can tell you my own grandchildren are being taught as homeschooled. And in terms of their reading ability, general knowledge, they are mountains ahead of students within the regular school system. And I think that, look, that's going to have to be a trend going forward until we take back our schools. Where I live in New York City, there are numerous reports of the children in very well-heeled schools around the city. The parents are paying literally $40,000-$50,000 a year in tuition for a grammar school, for heaven's sakes, which is mind-boggling in and of itself. And they are being taught the most radical, extreme, left-wing version of life that you can imagine. It's a system that's totally broken, one that really needs to be, frankly, broken down and rebuilt from scratch. This isn't a criticism, by the way, of individual teachers, many of whom do yeoman service, reaching into their own pocket for supplies, doing all sorts of wonderful things. But this curriculum that they have shoved down their throat that they're supposed to teach is abominable. It is historically inaccurate. It is politically motivated and just dead wrong on the facts. I know a science teacher who left her position because she was told to scrap the traditional teaching of science and replace it with a curriculum called sustainability, which is left-wing environmental propaganda. And you're seeing this in schools from one end of the country to the other.
And you know, President Reagan said that we're only one generation away from losing our freedom, that we have to protect it. And I think we are at that critical point now where we are starting, like in Loudoun County, where critical race theory is an issue. Also in Loudoun County, Virginia, where one teacher had the strength of will to stand up and say that he's going to follow his own religious beliefs and he is not going to use all the pronouns and the transgender um, things that are going on, shall I say, in a classroom, that a boy is a boy and a girl is a girl, especially young children, you know, that this is harmful to this type of policy that they have now in the school systems. Hundreds and hundreds of parents came out, they spoke out. And when they were getting applause for what they were saying, the school board in Loudoun County and Leesburg meeting decided just recently that they would kick everybody out of the room and they had security remove everybody. They didn't want to hear it. And what this tells me is the parents know what they need to do and they're starting to do it, but we still have elected officials, school boards, local elections can be overturned in the next cycle, but we need to have voters, we need to have people go on those boards and start representing the majority view in this country. And I'm not sure we're up to it yet, where parents have really understood the fact that these boards have a great deal of control over the indoctrination, and I'm going to call it that, Frank, indoctrination that their children receive in the public school system.
This hasn't been accidental. If you look at two key areas of the American society, school boards and the enforcement of justice, whether you're talking about a school board member or a local district attorney or a state attorney general, these are races that were considered, let's be honest, boring. No one really gave much about them in terms of thought because they figured, well, these are just, pro forma things. They'll do the mechanics of making sure the kids get their textbooks in their time in class. or a local district attorney or state attorney general will enforce the laws that have been passed by the governor and the legislature. Not a sexy thing to do, a functionary job, important job, but not particularly political or, frankly, for that matter, for a lot of people, very interesting. But look what's happened because of that. School boards are now become the spokespeople and the Gestapo, frankly, for the left. In New York State, my home state, the state attorney general, Letitia James, before she was in office, when she was campaigning, said that her whole motive for running for office was to, quote, get Donald Trump, unquote. Now, she didn't have any information that he had done anything wrong. He was just the president of the United States that she politically disagreed with. To say that the role of an attorney general is to get a politician that you disagree with is outrageous. Let's go to the position of district attorney. We saw how in states like New York and California and other places, rather than deal with the stunning increase in crime, rather going after criminals, what local district attorneys backed by George Soros's money, that's how they got elected, are using their positions to persecute political opponents, people who disagree with their leftist views. This is the total theft of the American judicial system for partisan politics. And while there's always been some partisanship in all levels of government, I guess it's unavoidable, unfortunately, I think this accelerated to the degree we see it today under the horrible Obama administration. Daria, if you can draw a line between the America that was and the America that is currently becoming, it happened during the Obama administration. We saw how the Department of Justice was used to basically harass anyone who disagreed with the sitting president, Barack Obama. We saw how the Internal Revenue Service was used as a wedge to harass anyone who disagreed with the administration. It is not coincidental, by the way, that the Biden budget, which was presented to Congress for the coming year, includes massive amounts of money for, guess what? The Internal Revenue Service, which is going to be used as a Gestapo against anyone who disagrees with Joe Biden.
You know, Frank, I want to go back to about 6 or 8 years ago when we first started doing our shows. You and I started talking about the fact that free speech in this country was being curtailed. And a lot of people said, oh, no, no, we're still fine. You and I talked about the fact that when we were growing up, most Americans had the ability to walk across a college campus and in any place on that campus have free speech. It was automatic that any place in the country you had free speech. Then we started to see over the years as we did the show, Frank, that we had to talk more and more about the fact that free speech is limited. For instance, on college campuses, we saw free speech zones because these poor little kids that are out there just might have their feelings hurt if somebody had some type of conflict with them, some type of verbal disagreement on certain parts and campuses. So they reserved a room, in some cases, literally a boxed area where these little whiny children, and I think of that as the typical kid, unfortunately, in many of these schools today, complaining about their feelings getting hurt because someone didn't agree with them. We talked about this over a half dozen years ago, and here we are today facing down with even a more serious threat to free speech as we see literally an attack on virtually all conservative social media in this country. Frank, we're going from bad to worse. I don't know how fast we can get this changed. This is going to be, I think, a generational undertaking.
Well, we have to undo 2 generations of leftist propaganda in our schools. There's no doubt about it. When you think of the totality of the assault on the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, and in fact, it's not just coming from college campuses. Senator Schumer has said that free speech is not absolute. It should be curtailed in certain cases, particularly when it comes to paid political speech. We've seen the Biden administration and the left, for the most part, attack the Second Amendment. And by the way, whenever you hear these unctuous comments by the left, oh, we're all in favor of the Second Amendment, we just don't want you to have guns. Clearly, it's a contradiction in terms. Fourth Amendment, right to privacy, is right out the window. The Ninth and 10th Amendments would say that those rights not given to the federal government, specifically in the Constitution, belong to the people or the states. Those things, those two amendments are just ignored for the most part. There is a misconception that has been rammed down the throats of the public that the Bill of Rights was to protect the federal government from the people. In fact, it's just the opposite. It's to protect the people from the federal government. Washington only has the rights that are and powers that were specifically given to it in the Constitution. Everything else remains with the people. Let's take that Second Amendment as just one example. If the Second Amendment were to vanish tomorrow, the right to bear arms would still exist within the Ninth and 10th Amendments because those powers to take away your weapons was not given to Washington. Just like the First Amendment, your right to freedom of speech doesn't only reside in the First Amendment, it resides in the Ninth and 10th Amendments. This attitude, and unfortunately, I believe it was even Justice Kagan, who, when she was being interviewed by the Senate for her nomination to the Supreme Court, said that she did not believe in the concept of inherent rights that the people have as individuals, that it is the rights that they are born with, not given by a government. The foundational concept of America is individual rights superior to the rights of the government, except those rights specifically given to the government in the Constitution. We're seeing the entire scheme of why America was founded in the first place being turned on its head. Derry, we just celebrated July 4th. It is startling to me to realize that the current left of the United States, and I include most of the entire Democratic Party, would have sided far more with King George III than with George Washington. They would want the people to be disarmed. Lexington and Concord, they would have sided with the British Redcoats taking the arms away. They would have sided against the people who didn't want to be faced with onerous taxes. They would have sided with King George over the United States. We heard that utter idiot, Maxine Waters, disparage the Declaration of Independence itself. We have got to start waking up and realizing that these people aren't just political adversaries, and I'm going to be very blunt here. They almost represent a third column, a group of people who oppose the existence of the United States itself. When we look, for example, at what's going on in our southern border, why in any measure wouldn't the left be why would the left be against securing our southern border? People are coming in with COVID. People are coming in bringing criminal cartels with them. People are coming in who are going to be a burden to the American taxpayer. And if you look very carefully behind their logic, I think these people like Maxine Waters and most of the left in the Democratic Party don't really feel comfortable with the existence of the United States as it currently exists.
And we see this outside of politicians too. If we go over to Hollywood and look at the typical individual there, especially these politicians that have a high school especially these actors and actresses that have sometimes a high school education with no experience in policy formulation, going before Congress and testifying on all types of issues simply because they have a name and a big mouth. And I really am getting tired of it. And we're starting to finally see now a little bit of change there, Frank. I have a tiny bit of hope. Just the other day, Kirstie Alley, the actress that was known as the barkeep on Cheers.
Great show.
Yeah, I mean, very typical American bar show up from Boston with all the neighborhood talk and all that. Kirstie Alley came out, and I'm sure this is going to hurt her in her career, and said, we are having too much openness in America. And what she was referring to and talked about is the fact that we are supposed to accept everything and anything by anyone. She said this is going to lead to things like pedophilia, man-boy love being legalized, to where adults should be allowed to love anyone they want in any way they want. There's a point of rationality where we have to say too far is just plain too far.
And I think we've seen that in other areas as well. Look, I believe people of goodwill can disagree on the issue of abortion in the first trimester. But what we've seen this grow into is the acceptance of infanticide. when you have people on the left literally saying it's okay to kill a baby that's viable and about to be born for no medical reason whatsoever, then I think you've seen how our culture has been destroyed. And again, this goes beyond just American culture. It's the entire concept of Western ethos from the Enlightenment on down.
And I want to point out two examples that go even further than what we're seeing in the United States. In a medical journal in Australia, a couple of doctors got together. One was a geneticist and some other type of doctor, highly respected at universities, and wrote in a medical journal what they called 2-year-old post-birth abortion. And what they said is a child genetically isn't fully a child until it's about 24 months old. Therefore, the parents should have the right to kill the child up until 2 years of age. Now let's go a little bit further over to China. Now, this practice supposedly has been slowed or stopped, but there's no way to confirm it. During the 1980s, in the area called Inner Mongolia in China in particular, they had very severe parent planning or family planning policies. One child was allowed to be born after receiving permission from the government per year. Hospitals were given a quota for births. The Chinese used United Nations Food for Peace program, PL 480 money to buy formaldehyde as part of their family planning programs. In order to comply with the government's rules on family planning with a quota for each hospital, when they went over their quota for the day, they simply would inject formaldehyde into the baby's brain as it was crowning in order to force it to convulse and die before it was fully emerged. That was not considered a death in China of a human being, because under Chinese law, it's written until a human being is emerged and the cord's cut, it's not a person. We're talking about countries and cultures that are very different from our own. I don't want to see us continue down the path of what was proposed in Australia and what actually happened in China. We have to say enough is enough.
There are no words to describe how horrible those things are.
It's horrific. It reminds me of Germany.
Yeah. Well, we certainly have given our audience a lot to think about today, and I think a plan of action as well. To our audience, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to being with you again next week.
We welcome our newest radio affiliate in Washington, D.C. at 96.7 FM. Watch us on Roku, public broadcast stations, and on the AM/FM 24/7 network. Tell Alexa to open that network and play our program. You can access the show on our website at usagovpolicy.com. Join us again next week. We're sponsored by the New York Analysis of Policy and Government, a division of the American Analysis of News and Media, Inc., and the Institute for American Politics. Email us at truthinradio@gmail.com.
Our producer is the amazing Abigail White, and our director is the brilliant Jeff Hansen.